Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Dion Leadership webinar series today. Our topic today is going to be High Potential Development Program, a case study. And joining us today is going to be Steve Dion, founder and CEO of Dion Leadership, Stan Green, Dion Leadership Coach and Facilitator, and Leslie Skinner, Vice President of Culture, Communication, and People at NGK Spark Plugs USA, Incorporated.
Thank you, Abby. Thanks for the introduction. Good to see everybody today, or hear everybody today, and to see Leslie and Stan. Thank you guys for joining us today. I am hoping to cover some great information about a program that we've done, and I wanted to first introduce Stan and Leslie, and then frame the work that we're going to do today, and jump right in. So Stan is one of our lead coaches, facilitators at Dion Leadership. His bio is on the screen here today, and he was a facilitator of this program at NGK for 2 cohorts, and will give his insights throughout this program. Stan and I have had the pleasure to work together for over 10 years and is a phenomenal facilitator, as you'll see in the results here. So looking forward to hearing Stan's thoughts today. Joining me also is one of our clients, Leslie Skinner. Leslie's bio is on the screen here as well. Leslie is the VP of Culture, Communications, and People at NGK Spark Plugs. Leslie, I was thinking about when we first met, and it was a referral from one of your colleague neighbors who was a client from years ago. And I remember that first meeting is about 4 years ago. And here we are 2 cohorts into this program. So very blessed and excited. A little shout out for that. And we both share the Michigan State background as well. And interestingly enough, too, I think it's relevant. Last bullet here, Leslie was the first female VP in the organization. And so it's great to see the strategy that she's brought to the thinking of this work and about culture change and leadership development. And really looking forward to hearing a client's perspective on programs like this. So again, thank you both for joining me today. So let me just tee this up. So what we're going to cover today is first is the reasons why the organization NGK decided to start this high potential development program, because we were able to partner with them at the onset of this, and this was new to the Americas PAMA region for this program. We are also going to talk about the design and the content and what was in the program and how that was sent to create behavior change and our lessons learned with that. Leslie's going to share how they launched the program internally and how they managed it to try to get effectiveness and create some stickiness and behavior change in the organization. And then what's really interesting about this particular program that we wanted to highlight in our webinar series here today is that the difference between our first cohort and the second cohort is we did a completely in-person facilitation for the first cohort, flew people in multiple times. We'll share what that looked like. With the pandemic this last year, they embraced the idea of going virtual, and we have a whole virtual facilitation model and want to compare and contrast that. So that'll be a big kind of part of our conversation today. And then of course, provide lessons learned. And then Leslie's going to talk about next steps for cohort 3. If you've done one way, one the other, what would you do a next time around? So we encourage you to use the chat today. We don't have any polls particularly to gather feedback that way. So feel free to send comments throughout, and we'll probably spend about 30 minutes going through the explanation of the program and then open it up for a dialogue, Q&A, and a chat about the program. So for those that are new on our webinar series here, Dion Leadership is really passionate about starting every day excited and ending every day accomplished from an employee's perspective and point of view, that we believe that organizations are better when this happens. And so the work that we do is with a team of over 60 coaches and facilitators that deliver work like this. And we're super excited to kind of showcase our work in this webinar series. And so these are our 6 kind of main product offerings. What we're talking about today falls kind of squarely in the leadership development bucket, but also in the individual leadership coaching bucket, and to some degree, organizational development, because we used this program to help drive organization and culture change as well. Some of the clients that we work with are on the screen here. You can see NGK Spark Plugs kind of squarely in the middle, and a whole bunch of other big organizations. We do a lot of work in healthcare, but also in these large global manufacturing organizations that have corporate headquarters in other countries, like as you'll hear NGK does, and then we're supporting many times the Americas region of the work in a program like that. So that's a little bit about us. I wanted to turn it over to Leslie next to talk a little bit about NGK and to frame sort of what this program was and what we were trying to accomplish.
Great, thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here to share a little bit about our program with you. First, let me tell you a little bit about who we are at NGK. So our organization, we are headquartered in Nagoya, Japan, and our USA headquarters is actually here in Wixom, Michigan. We have locations in 21 countries globally. We have about 16 employees around the world and about 2,900 in our region. And when I talk about our region, we refer to the PAMA region, which is the Americas, Australia, and Brazil as well for this particular program. We are a world leader in the manufacture of spark plugs and oxygen sensors. We also have other product lines that you can see, such as coils, sensors, the cutting tool industry, as well as the medical products, some ceramic bones, as well as oxygen concentrators. So moving on to when we started to think about this program and what we were trying to accomplish in developing a regional executive development program is we wanted a program that really focused on the soft skills of leadership, the behaviors that we wanted to see in our leaders, our current leaders and future leaders as we looked toward building a leadership bench. So part of that is understanding their communication style, how they can leverage their communication and their leadership of their teams and also with their peers, focusing on emotional intelligence and empathetic leadership, change and change management, which we know even in the past year is an extremely important requirement for our leaders, being able to have influence in their roles as a leader, influence, even if they weren't in a management role, how do they still leverage influence in the organization, accountability, and driving actions and results. So aligning their leadership values with our core values. And our core values at NGK are integrity, initiative, unity, and perseverance. So we've interwoven and we wanted to weave those throughout the program content and make sure that as we're building our behaviors and developing those leaders, that's something that becomes interwoven even in their own leadership values as they move through their journey. And another very key piece that we wanted to focus on is building a network of leaders and a talent pool within our region so that as we have these cohorts and as we build this pool of talent, we can utilize that to leverage when we have openings within our region or even projects or initiatives that we want to then utilize these particular leaders. So again, our focus was not so much specifics on case studies or even business acumen. It's really leadership behaviors that we want to see and drive our organization forward from that soft side of development. So after developing what do we want with the needs of our program, we really engaged the entire region actually in developing this program and getting their input and their buy-in on what are the objectives that we want to make sure are achieved in developing a regional executive development program. So you can see on the screen, 4 main objectives are what we look to come out of this program. Really accelerating the development of our high potential leaders, developing future leaders within our region, making sure we're fostering and improving their leadership skills and their knowledge, building a network of colleagues, as I mentioned, even in the last screen, that's a really important piece, making sure that those that go through this program are getting perspectives from the different functions and even different locations, getting out of the silos that maybe they work in on a day-to-day and expanding their perspective of the bigger picture of our business. Next slide, Steve. So how did we then select the participants for this program? We chose to go through a nomination process, not self-nomination, actually nominations, I should say a recommendation, being nominated by their managers, actually up through senior leadership and even the presidents of the different entities that engage in this program. So we developed a criteria. They have to have at least 2 years of employment with NGK. They do have to be in a management position and or be in a role that has influence over others if they're not in a direct supervisory or management role. Communication in English is extremely important because we hold the program in English, even though English is not always the primary language, the first language of all of our participants. We wanted to ensure there's demonstrated commitment, initiative, ability to have that bigger picture thinking. Again, we're trying to break some of that siloed thinking and really increase that perspective of our business. So showing that they can at least think outside of the roles that they play and the impact to the organization or even broader within the region. Of course, strong performance reviews are important and having a desire to grow. One key piece for us in building this program was this was not going to be a forced requirement, even in developing leadership, because we want leaders that want to grow, want to embark on this journey, and want to put the effort in. And so that's a key conversation that we actually ask our recommending leaders to have with the participants prior to even nominating them. We have actually a form that gets submitted once it goes up through the entities, and then it is submitted to the project management organization. But there's a number of open-ended questions. So we, as the project management team, can actually assess some of these criteria and make sure that we're having a diverse group. So we'll select 12 total participants for this program, ensuring that there's diversity in gender, in the role and function, even the tenure that they have, so that we can make sure that the conversations, the collaboration, the experiences that everyone is bringing enriches the environment and their leadership, their learning journey through this process. So for our first two cohorts, because we've only had two so far, the first cohort was made up of 3 women and 9 men. And the second one, we had 4 women and 8 men. So again, that diversity in gender is important. Represents the entities within the geographies that you can see. So the United States, Canada, Mexico, so North America, then we have Brazil and Australia. And then the functions that are represented. We don't particularly look at a certain function. We want all functions to be represented of all different leaders. So we have manufacturing, we've had HR, finance, we've had procurement, supply chain, sales. And again, when we put these teams together, we are looking to make sure there's a diverse group coming together so they can leverage and learn from each other and the experience that everyone brings to the table.
And we're talking about what, 12 time zone differences? Is that about right between Australia?
No, there's I think there's about 4 time zone differences. So yes, for our folks in Australia, unfortunately, they had very, very early mornings. And the rest of us had, evenings and afternoons. So trying to manage the time zone differences in a global program can be challenging.
And before we move into the program design, people are probably seeing this little pearl logo in the corner. Can you comment on how you decided to brand the program?
Oh, yeah. So as we talked about the involvement in developing this program, we actually involved many of the leaders around the region. And so not only input into developing the competencies and what we wanted to make sure we were stressing in the program, but the name itself, we had a naming competition. We weren't sure what to call this. We just knew it was an executive development program, and that wasn't a very creative name. So we actually asked the different companies to submit their ideas to name the program, and we had quite a few submissions. It was actually great, but this is a particular acronym for the program. So PEARL stands for PAMA Executive Advancement in Regional Leadership. And it came actually from our Australia, our folks in Australia. So it was actually a great opportunity, again, to get that buy-in, not only in the development of the program, but even just in the naming of this program across the region.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that introduction. Stan, let's go through the program design, and then Leslie, will come back to you with a lot of comments and thoughts as we unpack what did happen.
Sure.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks, Leslie, for the background in terms of what we had to accomplish. So the design was clear in terms of what you wanted as aspirations. And so we set our minds to how are we actually going to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the components were of the program. First, as a support throughout the program, we committed to having individual coaching available for all the participants. What we're learning in many different settings is that the process of executive coaching is a helpful process for leaders throughout the organization at multiple levels. And so to embed that into this program gave us an opportunity to have people be exposed to the process of coaching, perhaps who had not already had that, and really to get some sense for what benefits they might derive from having a sounding board, someone who can come alongside them as they are determining what commitments they want to make, how they're going to hold themselves accountable. So we designed the program to provide 4 coaching sessions between the in-person sessions that we had scheduled. We identified a cadre of coaches, varying backgrounds, and participants had the opportunity to select their coach. So we asked people to identify their first and second choice. We were able to accommodate those first and second choices for all of the participants. And in working with the coach, the participants had the opportunity to create an individual action plan. They knew what the objectives were of the program. They had a sense for what the material was that we would cover. So they had a chance to really reflect on what did they want to personally derive from this opportunity. By having individualized coaching, we could take the group sessions, which delivered content and provided sort of a collective experience, and really allow each participant to personalize that experience to their own specific needs. And then finally, as part of the program, we had as our capstone event the presentation of leadership manifestos, in which the participants had the opportunity to really distill their learning down into a brief presentation. And so in working with their coach, they had a chance to reflect on what the elements were that they wanted to include in those manifestos, and the coaches helped them to create those final statements of what their commitments were to themselves and to the organization as a result of being a part of this program. Next slide, please. So, as Leslie noted, there's a real focus on paying attention to what the level of self-awareness is that participants have. There are a couple of items that kind of constitute a point of view around this, and one of those items is the notion that an individual must first commit to being aware and cognizant of their own needs. So how do you lead yourself before you can then endeavor to lead a team and ultimately have an impact on leading the organization? And so we had a number of assessments that we used to support the material that we presented to help to focus on some of these elements of self-awareness. So within the DISC suite of assessments, we used the work of leaders, which incorporates, in addition to the standard DISC model that talks about communication and decision styles, it talks specifically about preferences and styles that leaders have in dealing with 3 different phases of projects in terms of vision, alignment, and execution. And so we find that the modification within DISC work of leaders is that while all styles are beneficial and have a place, at different points, different styles really lend themselves to different phases. And so work of leaders allowed us to look not just at individuals' personal preferences, but also at when those preferences were most resonant within a particular phase of a project. Of course, emotional intelligence was an important component of that, so we used the EQI, the 2.0 assessment, to help people really focus on their degree of self-management and relationship management. We looked at influence styles. What were their preferences in terms of how they chose to influence others and what tended to persuade them. And then lastly, in terms of self-awareness, we used a change style indicator because, again, it's important for leaders to have a sense for how they address change so that they can best equip themselves to help their teams focus on and address change as well. And so these things really constituted a sort of a portfolio of awareness, if you will, for the participants to have a sense for how do they show up as leaders. And as I often noted to them and note to others as well, when you have the benefit of these assessments, it gives you the opportunity to incorporate an awareness of self, the agility to understand that there are others who have different styles and there are other choices that one might make. And then lastly, to be able to demonstrate the courage to choose the style or the approach that's most necessary in any setting, even when that style or approach might not be your natural default. So helping people develop a comfort and a confidence on flexing their style so that they can be most influential was an important element of this. Next slide, please. So this is the way the program laid out when we conducted cohort 1. We had 4 in-person sessions that you see noted here with coaching between each of those sessions. So the topics that you'll note, session 1 really gave us a foundation around the values of the organization. Leslie made mention of connecting individual values to organizational values, so that was an important element of that. We looked at the foundation of this work of leaders tool and focused on the vision component, and looked at the assignment of our groups. So people were in leadership or in project groups throughout the opportunity or throughout the program. So they had the opportunity to work more closely with a small team. So rather than have all of our activities be committee of the whole activities, if you will, there were triad activities that people had an opportunity to engage in. Session 2 turned attention to the alignment phase of the work of leaders model. We looked at emotional intelligence and strategic thinking and really explored the strategic plan for NGK. In our 3rd in-person session, we focused on the execution element of the work of leaders model, and we turned attention to the influence model and accountability. So how does one hold oneself accountable, and how do you then in turn hold others accountable? And then lastly, we focused on change leadership in the 4th in-person session. We spent a fair amount of time in that 4th session looking at personal development planning. So what were one's commitments to oneself for ongoing work, as well as a cohort. How did this cohort of 12 participants see themselves, and what was their commitment to the organization? One of the things that we reinforced throughout the program is that they become a community of practice. As I shared with them, they looked around the room to the 12 of them. If they were to spool the tape forward 5 or 10 years in their careers in NGK, they'd be still making decisions. Those decisions would influence more people. They would generate more dollars. But the people in that room were really a community of practice that would be fellow travelers with them throughout their careers to make a difference for NGK. And so we reinforced that. And then, as I noted, we had the leadership manifestos where they had a chance to talk about their own style and what the commitments were that they'd made and what people could expect to see from them as leaders going forward. Next slide, please.
So cohort 1 was deemed as super successful. I remember we sat with the committee, both Leslie, Rich, and Matt, and Sarah, and said, pretty much, let's replay it again. That went great. New group of people, and then COVID hit. And I have to say and give a big thanks to NGK and their commitment to this leadership development program, because we had many programs where people were literally flying in the air to deliver something in person and had to turn around, fly back, and as you all know, everything was shut down. So, they were an early adopter to take a program like this and say, it's soft skills based, as Sarah mentioned, or as Leslie mentioned up front, can we do all that virtually? And we had lots of conversations. We role played and demoed even what a virtual delivery model would look like. And they trusted us and jumped in with 2 feet. And so the next whole program was delivered completely virtually. And Stan, you want to explain it?
Certainly. Let's take a look. So as we made this shift from the in-person delivery to the virtual delivery, as I noted, we had 4 sessions. So we had 4 in-person events. They ranged in duration from 2 to 3 days. We flew people into locations in California for those 4 sessions. And we transitioned from that to a set of 4 4-day series of events. So for the course of 4 days during the course of a week, we had 4 3-hour virtual events. As Leslie mentioned, the way we scheduled those late in the afternoon on the East Coast in the United States made for an early morning for our participant from Australia, but we did the best that we could so that it was at least early in the morning, yet before the crack of dawn, so that the person had the opportunity to feel that they were at least being accommodated, and we were making accommodations for their body clocks. So those 4-day series became the new roadmap for how we delivered Pearl. So let's look at the next slide and take a look at how that mapped out. So you see here over the course of 11 months of the overall program design, the boxes in green denote those 4-day series of virtual sessions. So in August, November, February, and May, we had 4 3-hour sessions during those weeks. The first of those sessions, we actually started with an icebreaker event before we started the training. So we just had typically a social time. So people had a chance to get to know each other a little bit. We had a little fun icebreaker event. As I recall, our question was to share your pandemic recipe, food or beverage that had become your go-to during the time that the world was causing us to sequester. So it gave people a chance to have sort of a fun way to get to know each other. And then we commenced with our 4-day series. Again, the foundation of the work of leaders was part of that first week. So the mapping, if you will, for the content was identical. But as we'll talk about in a moment, using a learning management system, we were able to build that content so that the things that we chose to carry out that weren't done during the virtual sessions, people had self-paced work that they did. And we'll walk through some more detail of what that LMS incorporated in just a moment. The beige blocks talked about the activities that took place between those sessions. So we had time for the individual coaching meetings during the months between the virtual sessions. People had the LMS was loaded with pre-readings, with videos. They completed their assessments. If there was an opportunity or a need for them to connect with their colleagues and project teams, those kinds of things took place during the months that were denoted in beige. So we essentially mapped those 4 3-day sessions across the 11 months to provide a combination in hybrid fashion of self-paced work driven by the LMS and our 3-hour sessions that we conducted virtually using Zoom. Next slide, please. So the learning management system, sort of the engine behind this, it was helpful to have a single repository for all of the information that people needed to refer to during the course of the program. So if there was an assessment that was there, if there was self-paced work, we had the opportunity to bring the faces and voices of executives into the room by having them participate by creating videos as introductions. We incorporated the voices and faces of participants from cohort 1 to provide welcome videos to share a bit of their perspective on what they got out of the system or out of the program and how people could best leverage the investment to make the most use of the investment that the company had made and the investment in time that they had made as well. The great thing about the LMS, as Leslie mentioned, while the program is in English, not all of the participants are native English speakers. So using the hybrid benefits of the LMS gave us the opportunity to provide that material so that since a good deal of the content was self-paced, people could walk through that, again, at a pace that was comfortable for them. If they needed more time to walk through it, if they needed to repeat a particular video segment, if they needed more time to look up unfamiliar phrases, while we committed to trying to remove as much idiom as possible. That's one of the points that we do from a design standpoint, removing kind of unique English language idiom. It's just helpful to have people have the chance to read through that at their own pace and to make their notes. And again, using writable PDFs, for example, as resources within the LMS, people could annotate those materials in the way that was most appropriate and most helpful for them. If anyone on the call has an interest in seeing that LMS or having a demonstration of that, if you just place that information in the chat, then we at Dion Leadership can contact you to arrange for a demonstration of that capability. Next slide, please. So this is just a simple screenshot of the facilitator view of what is the background behind the LMS. So if you look at this, you see the 1.1 through 4.4 represent the respective modules for each of 4 sessions. So the 1 dot is week 1, 2 dot is week 2, etc. You see the content or the topics for each of those. So people at a glance can see what's the roadmap for this overall program over the course of the 11 months. To benefit the facilitator, at the right side, we've got some bars that just show the percent completion for each of the items. And so since all of the participants are logged in or registered within the LMS, at a glance, the facilitator can take a look at this and can see who's completed the pre-work. One of the challenges with virtual programs is you'll have different degrees of compliance and speed of compliance with completing pre-work. Certainly, we make concessions as possible for those that might not complete the pre-work because of other contingencies that might arise. But it's really essential as a success factor to reinforce the importance of people completing the pre-work. And so by using a dashboard like this, the facilitator can see it looks as though we're on track. People perhaps need to do a bit to catch up with the creating a vision module, any pre-work that they need to have there. So the slider bar can give you a sense for who's completed the pre-work. We can then send out a prompt to remind them of that so that when people arrive for the virtual session, everyone is as much as possible on a level playing field, because the content is so condensed and the time moves so rapidly that it's really difficult for someone to either keep up or catch up if they've not completed the pre-work. And so this dashboard gives us a chance to just to monitor that and manage that so that people can be most successful in participating in the program.
I think we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through this, but to us, I mean, it's a substantial investment to take and make a blended learning course, not just take a course that has in-person instructor guide and say, we're just going to get on a Zoom call and do what we did in a classroom virtually. That model is not the most effective learning possible. And I remember as we were going through this, and Leslie, you can tell me if this is true or not, I feel like what sold you guys is that you could see the online learning piece first and go, we're not going to give Zoom fatigue. And this isn't just a couple of nice things to do, but when you saw that the sort of this integrated approach of what would have been the hour of the instructor teaching and setting up is happening asynchronously, then we get into this virtual classroom and they're immediately moving into breakout rooms and talk and apply. That was where you said, I feel a little bit more comfortable. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because, moving the program from in-person to virtual, we had a lot of questions and a lot of discussion and how were we going to do that and making sure it was still engaging. And so you're right, the LMS was a key factor in being able to put some of that front work that Stan talked about in the in-person, where we spent a whole half morning going through a lot of really foundational material. We could do that up front prior, still do it in a way where they got the information, they got the introductions, but then the days they were on the call or in the Zoom, it was focused on content and then again, collaboration. So that was a very helpful piece of making that decision to move this forward.
So let's share some of the results before we open this up for some questions. And what we like to do with every program is measure both learner feedback immediately after each workshop, and then depending on the program and the length of it, to do some learnings gained surveys pre and post. So in this particular instance, we did both. And today we're going to share really the elements of the immediate feedback from the learner experience in both cohort 1 and cohort 2. We're in the process of actually writing up a white paper that includes manager versus employee behavior change feedback, which is a whole nother wonderful piece of data, but we're not quite completed with that. And that really isn't completely relevant to the topic here today. So we don't want to overwhelm you with data. So what we do have here are 4 of the 11 questions we ask every participant at the end of each workshop. And we have an agreement scale to these questions. And 4 of the particular items we thought were very relevant because we're able to look at the exact same content into similarly, placed learning groups because the culture is the same. The real big variable difference is program 1 was facilitated in person, program 2 was virtual. So this is the insights that we gained from that. The first question was related to the facilitation style. So the facilitation style helped me learn. You'll see on the left side here, the in-person feedback was 98% of the participants either agreed or strongly agreed that the facilitation style in the in-person program that we first showed you that was delivered live in a classroom environment, really resonated to people. 83% of the participants either agreed or strongly agreed with the facilitation style question here in the virtual feedback. This is the largest gap. As you see me go through these 4, you'll see the gap gets a little bit closer. What I take out of this is that this is as much a change management issue as it is a limitation to technology and format issue, because people were just learning to go, I'm used to being in the classroom. I'm used to, having a breakfast, lunch, and dinner and doing things together. And I know what that looked like. I've had meetings this way before. I've never had training this way before. So we'll show you a little bit more about what this says, but particularly like one comment, for example, that came out of the open-ended comments related to this is the quote, I was a little skeptical, to be honest, as to how it was going to work virtually online, but it is working very well, and I cannot wait to continue this further. So people walked into this going, I don't know, 4 days in a row, half day virtual, what does that mean? So what did we find out next? The second question was the facilitator presented the content effectively. So not just the facilitation style or approach or the limitations of doing this virtually, but the facilitator. In this case, the wonderful Stan Green. And how did he do with this? And you can see we had 100% agreement, in all of the different surveys for each of the workshops that the facilitator presented this effectively. 95% in the virtual. So super high feedback. A couple of comments that came out of there was, I fully appreciate our facilitator's method of engaging the students in the discussion in the virtual session. There are varying personalities in the group, and he's always able to get us engaged. So a big part of the learning for us is not just the design of it, but it's also who can facilitate in a way that garners everybody's attention and time. And I think that's an important part of this. The last quote here was that I wanted to share before the next question is our facilitator's performance has been a differentiator for my learning. At first, I was quite in doubt about the effectiveness of online training. Although I still think that personal contact enriches any human interactions, the course has been a success. Third question. The individual and group learning activities were engaging and helped me learn. So we had a 91% of agreement in in-person classroom and 90 in the virtual, albeit if you see the strongly agree was even higher in the second group as well. And, it's just showing as we get forward into this and seeing as people say, well, even though the facilitation style, I don't love it, the actual learning activities, they work. And the comment here was overall a very good workshop, delivered well. The breakout rooms were very helpful and established other views and worked together. I look forward to the next session. So you can see as we kind of track this, people warming up to this idea. And then last, an overall comment, and I love this question because it really speaks to, people are busy, and these high potential leaders in particular, we're trying to engage them in the organization. The last thing they want to see as training is this non-value added extra thing I have to do. So this question of overall, this workshop is a worthwhile investment of my time and attention. I think that's a great question to be able to say all in, did the person find this valuable? 98 in person, 95 virtual. We feel great about that and showing that overall virtual learning works. We didn't know when we went into this deep of a soft skills program that had this many workshops, what we would see. And we're just happy to see the results of this. The comment here is, I thought the daily learning sessions went by really fast. This is my first virtual learning experience, and I was very impressed. I thought the options to engage either polls, whiteboards, etc., were all placed well to keep the engagement. So we're finding virtual learning working, and I'd love to hear, as we kind of unpack this, any comments or feedback people have about that, as well as kind of Leslie's feedback of, now I've done in person, now I've done virtual, what's next? So let's get into some.
Yeah, and Stan or Steve, if I'll just, start, we did have reservations, as you heard Steve say, moving into this virtual program. We wanted to make sure the engagement, that personal engagement and interaction, we weren't sure how that was going to go, right? In a virtual environment, you can see it in person, those break time discussions, those lunch and dinner discussions where you really start to develop those relationships. How is that going to work? But really, and you heard the reservations, as Steve said, from some of the comments, people had reservations too. What was this going to look like? But as we moved through, and I think we even said, we'll try the first one, and if it doesn't work, we'll pause. So we went through the first one and realized this is really going well. We had lots of conversation. And then as we moved through the entire year, we just saw such a rapport build, relationships building, networking happening, even in a uniquely different way than the in-person. And so, realizing that this can be a successful way to do such a development program, albeit we still had some challenges, or things we might want to shift. So Stevie said, kind of, what do we want to do moving forward? I'll just kind of address that. We think a hybrid would probably work best for cohort 3. All things being, that the pandemic allows us to do that, but having some in person and then some virtual, because we did hear that the in-person interaction and engagement was missing, that our participants really did want to be able to see face to face and have those conversations. So having that maybe for the first and fourth session, and then the middle two maybe virtual. So then again, it kind of reduces the travel and time commitment, but still allows us to have a valuable program and doing it in a blended, a more hybrid type program.
Great. Thank you for that. Can you also talk a little bit about what you've observed in the participants? So we had this feedback in the evaluations of people saying, I learned, this is valuable, but what are you seeing now that you have 24 people that have experienced this program?
Yeah, so some of the things that, we're starting to see is confidence in even their leadership, or in meetings, depending on, maybe the conversations we're having, confidence in their ability to communicate or share their ideas or speaking up. And so again, leveraging that influence in a positive way. We hear a lot of our folks that went through this program reference the tools and the assessments and their disc style, and, and they're utilizing what they've learned and really putting it into practice, which we feel we're so happy to see, because, there are training programs you've heard of in the past where, maybe they attend and then nothing really sticks. This is sticking, and they're using it, and you're hearing it in their conversation, even in talking about how they lead their teams, the meetings they're having better meetings, they're providing more vision or strategy, so it's really starting to cascade even through their teams. And then one of the things, I think that we're excited about too is it's not even our participants. We're now starting to hear of other associates asking to be in the program. They say, I'd like to be nominated for Pearl. How can I do that? I'd like to participate. And so there's a growing now level of interest as we've had 2 cohorts, as they've heard their peers and or colleagues talk about it. And so it's starting to even build in momentum within our organization as something to strive to be a part of, which is what we were hoping it would become, as we develop leaders throughout the now and into the future.
I know retention wasn't a original stated goal, but are you finding that people are staying because you have programs like this? Either they've attended or they see this as an opportunity to attend in the future?
To be honest, we haven't quite measured or seen that since we've only had the 2 programs. But given, again, the commentary that we're hearing with, I'd like to be a part of that. How do I do that? I'd like to become a future leader. It certainly has, obviously retention ability to retain our future talent. But we haven't yet measured it. I can tell you of the 24 that we've had, all of them are still with our organizations. We've seen 6 promotions out of that, even just in the 2, and even 1 took a completely, I'll call it a functional shift, went into a completely different role, a new role to try something different. So, we are looking at that group. We are looking at, giving them increased opportunity as it arises in the organization, which is again part of one of the objectives of the program.
That's a trend and measure in my book. I mean, 24 out of 24 are still here in a time when there's lots of shift. That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stan, here's a question for you. The comment, the evaluation results about the facilitator and the facilitation style. I know there's a lot of folks on the line here that are trainers or training leaders as well. What do you do differently as a facilitator when you're facilitating virtually versus in a classroom?
I'd say the most significant difference is, I'd say, a focus on transparency and authenticity. When you're in the room face to face with people and you're kind of controlling the environment, it's sort of like going on stage as a performer in some respects. You try to minimize all of the factors that might be distractions. And so everything's just so. And you do the same thing virtually, but we all know from, a year and a half of experience that sometimes there are some technical things that just arise. And sometimes those technical things are out of your control. And sometimes they're as simple as, I put myself on mute when I was starting the meeting and I forgot to unmute my microphone. I mean, it's a little thing, but we still do it 2 years in, right? And so transparency and authenticity in terms of not, this is a technical term coming up, not freaking out when some little quirk happens technically. And to be able to model to the participants that, sometimes things might be a little bit hinky. It might not work exactly the way you thought, but, I'm able to deal with this gracefully and continue to move on. So with a touch of self-deprecating humor, extending the grace to myself to know that I'll control what I can, and the things I can't control, I'll find a way to elegantly adapt to. That's a mindset that I find was most helpful for me to really manage this well, and to put people at ease with the fact that on their end, something's going to happen technically sometimes, and they're going to feel a little bit out of sorts. And we can all kind of support each other and manage it together.
Great. Here's a question for both of you that's come into the chat here. And I know, Leslie, you observed all these workshops as well, even though you weren't a participant. Is there something that you saw occur in the virtual settings that may be an unintended benefit that you wouldn't see in an in-person program?
I don't know if it was necessarily that you wouldn't see it in the in-person, but one of the things I noticed observing the virtual, and I mentioned, we were concerned about the collaboration or, the interaction, but we saw more of that very quickly in the virtual environment than we did in the in-person. The in-person, it took a little bit for them to warm up. We had executive observers in the room in the in-person, and so may have been some just nervousness of who was in the room. But in the virtual, and maybe it's just that feeling of there's a little bit of protection with this screen right in front of you, but there was a lot of interaction, conversation very quickly. You always know who's going to, I guess, speak up more quickly than others, but we were really, really surprised at the level of interaction and communication that happened very quickly in this particular group. So I don't want to say that it couldn't happen in the in-person, but it happened so much more quickly than we were expecting it to, which was a really, an unknown benefit that would come out of this.
Thanks for sharing that, because I'm finding that as well in other places, that it's almost a paradox. Like the farther away I am from you, the more likely I am to share. And I don't know what that is, but in team development workshops and things, same thing is happening. People are unpacking conversations that you would want to have with a sensitive subject as a team, and they'll do it over screen, maybe where they wouldn't do it if they were sitting within shoving distance of the person across the table with them. Stan, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, we've all probably experienced in this last year and a half or 2 years, there's the light and the shadow side to the virtual engagement. The shadow side is, the dog's going to bark, the child's going to come in the back of the screen or something like that. But the light side to that is there's a degree of intimacy that comes with interacting with your coworkers when they are in their space where they live the rest of their lives. And I would call that one of those unanticipated benefits of this, that there's a degree of intimacy that arises and a collegiality that comes about much more rapidly, I think, when we're kind of talking with people in their spare bedroom or their kitchen or wherever it is they happen to be, and when they have to go off camera because they got to feed the 2-year-old or whatever the case might be. We've learned to just incorporate all of the elements of our respective lives into our interaction, and I think that's a good thing.
Another question that came in here is about culture. This is 24 people out of a region of 2,900. Are you seeing, because these are high potentials, any impact on culture yet? Or how long do you feel like you need to, how many people need to go through a program as you maybe evolve your culture in a newly intended ways?
No, that's a great question. I don't know if I would say out of the 24, we're seeing this a huge impact. But again, because they're utilizing the tools that they've learned and they're taking that back to their teams, one thing that we didn't necessarily outline, but it's become something that we think is kind of common, is this we're building a common language and kind of tool set among our leadership group. And so we've had some current leaders, as we started this program, we put current leaders, even executives, and then intermixed it with future, those that we'd like to have in the future. So as we move forward, I think as we have this commonality, this common language and understanding of the styles and how we can leverage that to be better leaders, I think we will see that shift into the future. So it's probably a little early to see that, but I anticipate we'll see that, because our goal is to get all of our current leaders through this program, and then we're looking at future leaders. So that kind of is really an unintended positive that's come out of it, or an unplanned positive that we're seeing, which I do think will have an impact on culture going forward.
Another question for you, Leslie. Are you seeing the investment in individual coaching worth the cost of coaching?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've gotten such good feedback on the coaching that actually they'd like to see more. We could do more coaching, because we just do the one in between. So the participants put the time and energy into that session, and they get quite a bit out of it. So I would say absolutely the coaching is an integral part of this program. And like I said, we've gotten feedback that if we could do more, they would love to see even more of that, pulled into the program.
I've gotten through all the questions. If anybody has any last questions, if you want to put them in the chat, that would be great. One more I would like to just throw out there is curious for me is anything, we've done a lot of different designs of this, and your design of 4 days in a row of learning, kind of replicating your quarterly, let's all fly together and be together for a week, versus we have other programs where the organization just says, we're going to pick a half a day every other Tuesday and do this for a longer period of time in terms of the, when the in-person learning events are. What's your view on, now that you've done this program this way with 4, kind of learning weeks versus separating it more?
So we like the 4, I guess, the chunks of time, because, obviously everyone has their day job and they've got all of their other things they're focused on. So we like the idea of having it where at least for those 4 sessions, they're coming together and they're focused, and that is the focus. And it's difficult because they've got other things obviously that they're on hold. But our concern is if we interspersed it too much, then it may not hold the importance, because it just becomes something that's kind of interspersed every other week, at least from our point of view. So we like the idea of keeping it chunked, because then it's a focus, and then they can go back and kind of still do the learning in between, but then come back together in what we feel is a little bit more manageable given the rest of their responsibilities.
Awesome. And what's nice about this virtual kind of puzzle piece format is you can do it different ways, depending on your audience, your need. If you were in a, with a plant management team that maybe couldn't do it that way, you could do the same program and replicate it in a different style. It can fit different audiences and needs. Anything else the two of you want to comment on as we close that we didn't get a chance to ask today?
No, I don't think so. Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to talk about the program. We're really, really pleased with the program and the direction it's going, and we're excited for the future to continue it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for participating, Leslie, and for sharing your comments. I know our audience really likes to hear from clients as well as the work that we're doing too. So this is great. For those of you, to close up, the next workshop or the next monthly webinar we're doing is, can you see that, is, get to the end, we're doing an executive coaching panel on Tuesday, September 14th, this same time. And we'll be bringing 3 of our executive leadership coaches together. We did this about a year ago and got a lot of good feedback. So talking specifically about individual leadership coaching, full programs, what are leaders saying, not saying, and being able to participate in a discussion with coaches about what the coaching process is, but also what leaders are being coached on. So in the chat, you should see a link to that one. If you can join us, that'd be great. Feel free to share it with other people. And with that, I will say thank you again to Leslie and Stan, and for those that participated today. Hope it was helpful. And if we can answer any other questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks. Bye-bye.